Hi all, thanks for joining us on this webinar on Journey to Modern SharePoint. And this is brought to you by C Sharp Corner Pune chapter. The host for today is me, Nandadeep Nasan, and along with me I have Prasham Sabadra. So, uh, Firstly for me, I'm working in SharePoint for almost 14 years. So along with SharePoint, I'm working with .NET, Microsoft Azure, and various other .NET technologies. So brief about me is that I'm a C Sharp Corner MVP, and then a Microsoft Certified Professional and a CSM. And apart from that, here are the handlers by which you can get connected with me. Prasham, if you would like to introduce you very briefly, and maybe at the end you can have it in more details. Prasham, can you hear me? Voice is bit faint, but okay. All right, maybe you can fix the audio issue meanwhile, but we are hearing you very, very faint. Yep. All right, so let's get started. So the agenda for today is that we will see like what we were doing so far in the classic SharePoint versus what are the new features what we have in modern SharePoint, and then what is exactly mean by SharePoint modern SharePoint or this modernization concept, and then how we can enable the modern experience onto the root side collection, and then there's one utility from Microsoft called as SharePoint Modernization Scanner. So we will have a deep dive into it, and then maybe a practical examples of how we can transform an existing classic SharePoint site to a modern experience. And then we will have a look at the Microsoft search in Office 365. All right. So then to start with, what is the difference between a classic SharePoint and a modern SharePoint? So at least three slides from here, we will have some theory, and then we will go for a demos. So we have been using SharePoint since a long, and even with our journey to Microsoft Office 365, we have been using the classic SharePoint, and recently we see that there are some changes happening onto the SharePoint, and we are gradually moving towards the modern SharePoint. Even though if you are using classic SharePoint, you must have seen that already your list and libraries they started gradually moving towards modern experience. So we will see like what are the differences each one has, and what that we are carrying out to the modern SharePoint and what we are leaving behind with the classic SharePoint. Okay, so on a comparison notes, uh, modern SharePoint on a technical front is designed with the modern web development standards like JavaScript and HTML, whereas the classic SharePoint was more based on to the ASP.NET web technology, which is kind of an server model kind of a technology, wherein client makes some request to the server, it sends out the request object, and then the request gets created onto the server, and even we get the response back to the client. So the old or the classic SharePoint was based on that, but in the modern SharePoint it is mostly designed onto the modern web development standards. So we don't have any postback mechanisms as such in a modern SharePoint. So that way it is very much responsive. Responsive doesn't mean mobile friendly, but even it is mobile friendly. But responsive here in the context mean it is very much quick to respond to our request. Then the second point is responsiveness. So modern SharePoint is responsive by nature. So it is mobile friendly. You don't have to make any extra efforts to make your modern SharePoint site mobile friendly. It is already mobile friendly, but that wasn't the case with classic SharePoint. There were few plugins available even from PNP, patterns and practices, so that we can install those plugins, and we can make our classic SharePoint responsive, but that wasn't available out of the box. Then from the speed perspective, obviously the modern SharePoint is faster, being that it is developed using JavaScript and HTML. So most of the page is created in the browser itself, whereas in the classic SharePoint, the page creation was taking place onto the server and the response was again sent back to the client. So as a as a consequence of this, the classic SharePoint was a bit slower than the modern SharePoint. Then from the branding perspective, we have some limitations that we no more have any master pages or page layouts that we can create customly in modern SharePoint. But there is a new introduction of site themes for a branding. Whereas in classic SharePoint, we used to have customize the master pages. Even we can include CSS and JavaScript injections. So we had all the control, but unfortunately, it is not directly available in modern SharePoint. We don't have any control over the master pages or the page layouts. Just that we can use site theming for branding, which is kind of matching with our customers. And then onto the second front, for the team sites, there is a huge changes for the modern SharePoint. So all the modern team sites, they are kind of backed up by the Office 365 groups so that it provides some larger collaboration options. We will see in details how they are, but for a time being, they are connected, or the team sites are connected to Office 365 groups for more options. At least this wasn't the case in the classic SharePoint. Those sites were not connected to Office 365. But yeah, for example, if we already have any classic SharePoint site and if we want to connect that site to Office 365 group and get the benefits of modern SharePoint, so yes, it is possible. And in the subsequent slides, we will see how it can be done. From the extensibility perspective, modern SharePoint does supports extensibility using a SharePoint framework. We can create web parts or extensions based on SPFX so that we can create our customized solutions on top of modern SharePoint. Whereas in the classic SharePoint, we had all the privileges to create the custom web parts, directly deploy it to the site and make it work. And then from the customizations perspective, again, there is one limitation with modern SharePoint is that we have only some built-in locations with which we will have to work with, like the top or the bottom part of the page, so that it will not directly break your UI or the document object model, but we can hook in our HTML to certain parts of the modern SharePoint so that it will not entirely take down the DOM, but we can still customize our headers and footers up to some extent. With the classic SharePoint, at least we had all the liberty to break the DOM structure and make the changes whatever required. But this has again got some risk that if the structure changes in the future from any of the release from Microsoft, then even the entire DOM may get down. From the templatizing perspective, we right now have site designs and site scripts so that we can create a new templatized sites on a modern SharePoint. Whereas in the classic, we had site templates by which we can create new sites. From the list and library improvements, we have or we are covering those in a practical, but there are some improvements in the UI. There are some improvements in the filtering, sorting, list view thresholding, and column formatting and row formatting. Column formatting and row formatting are the newer concepts in modern SharePoint that wasn't supported in Classic. At least in the Classic, we just used to extend the list with JS links. But as of now, I don't see any new development investments to the Classic list and library improvements. Then from the security perspective, modern site is more secure, more locked down, and fortunately or unfortunately, we cannot write our own script on top of modern page. Whereas in the classic, we had all the liberty to run our JavaScript throughout the site. We can probably add the script editor or container web part, and we can then make it work. So the last slide of the theory. So from the news section, which is a recent introduction of modern SharePoint, so that we can create a news, we can even make those news roll up onto a SharePoint pages, at least that wasn't supported out of the box in classic SharePoint. We had to create our own page layout and content types to make it work. Again, hub site was one more new concept in modern SharePoint, wherein we can create multiple or connect multiple site collections with one common hub, so that we can share the themes, we can share the news, and we can search across all those connected sites. Sorry. Whereas in classic we had very limited capabilities. From again the web part and customizations, we again can create SPFX web part which are responsive, and that can work in modern and classic pages. Whereas the web parts or the customizations that we did in classic, they only work on classic. They cannot be imported to modern SharePoint. Then from the future investment perspective, yes, definitely there is a investment by Microsoft in terms of development capabilities or newer functionalities to the modern SharePoint. But from the classic front, I don't think that there will be any newer investment to the classic SharePoint. But nothing to worry that Microsoft doesn't have any plans to turn off the classic sites in the near future. So maybe walkthrough of sites. So most of you have already used classic SharePoint and modern SharePoint, but one moment. But yeah, so this is maybe how it was in the old days, like the classic SharePoint sites, and right now this is how it is. So even this one is very much user friendly, and even it is very much responsive. So for example, if I can oh, if I can stretch it down, and you can see that it is very much responsive. We don't have to write any code for it. So this is means at least on this front, classic SharePoint is a bit behind the modern SharePoint. Alright, so again coming back to these slides, we will see like what is mean by modernizing the SharePoint sites. So what is mean by a modernization concept, and how we can transform our old classic SharePoint sites to the modern SharePoint sites. So okay, so maybe firstly let's start with the team site. So for example, if you want to create a new team site, it will be very much simple. Like we can just go here, we can click SharePoint from here. Maybe I will open it in a new tab. We can just click create site, and we get an option to create the team site or communication site. If in case we go for a team site, and I will just call it as webinar demo, and I will just I can even select whether this site has to be a private or public, so that everyone can access this. And here, till the moment I'm adding the additional owners or additional members, it is creating the site in the background. So site has already created. Once we click finish, it will redirect us to a site creation, whereas the old classic site was taking maybe up to 5 to 7 minutes to create, but this modern SharePoint site gets created maybe in a few seconds of time. So what's good here is that we have a news feed that is working out of the box in a modern team site. So here you can see that we can have a new news section. So we can directly create a post here with the title, and even we can add any web parts which are maybe presenting that news, and by that way we already have the news created for us. And once it is done, we can click the post news, and the news will be posted to our site. And again, it is based on whether it was a public site or a private site. So from that front, what good with modern team site is that the news feed. And then each of the team site is connected with the Office 365 group. And what are the benefits of getting connected to the Office 365 group, we will cover in the subsequent slides. And then even we have support from PNP team for a programmatic approach to this modern team site. Sorry. So that was good with the modern team sites, but what are the limitations what we have in the modern team sites? So the first thing is we have very limited branding. So if I can switch back to the modern team site, and if we go to the change the look, here we have only few themes to select from. So we don't have much customizations options like writing our own CSS and embed that CSS in a modern SharePoint. So that is one limitation we have in the modern team site. And again, we don't have any custom headers or footers. Probably we'll have to go ahead with the SPFX extensions to create it. And then again, it is not directly listed in the admin UI, which is the classic admin UI. Probably this is the place I'm referring to. But we'll have to go to the modern SharePoint admin center, and from there it can be listed out. And then again, this child site to the modern site, they may revert to the classic site. So then in that case, we will have a combination of sites, like the top level site will be a modern, and the child site might be a classic one. Again, from the developer perspective, may not be a good news is that we don't have any scripting option available onto the modern site. So what that means is we cannot embed our JavaScript directly onto a modern SharePoint sites. So those were the goods with the modern SharePoint site, and limitations with the modern SharePoint site, which we are referring from classic SharePoint site. So then, for example, let's go into more details of modern SharePoint site for having the pages, I mean modern pages and the modern web parts. So then in that case, probably if you want to create a page, so the page can be directly created from here, or as a news, or even from here we can directly add a page. It will directly create your page. Maybe I will say webinar page. We can add any of the content here. So and we can publish. So the page gets created very quickly. We can copy this address and share with anyone, or right from here we can email this page address to the target audiences. So this is how the page will get very fastly created in a modern SharePoint site, and then even we can add the web parts onto it. So the good thing is that even in the classic SharePoint site, we can create the modern pages. So for example, if I just move to this classic SharePoint site, and if I add a page here, so you can observe that this is not a classic page, but this is a modern page. So even in a classic site, we can create a modern page. So the classic site can have a combination of pages. So it can be a classic page, or even it can be a modern page. So what this modern page denotes is that we can have sections up to 3 columns, and then we can click the plus onto the furthest left sign, and we can add as much sections as we need. So at least this symbols it, this one represents the edit for your section. This represents move, and this represents delete. So practically, if I edit this page, and if I keep on adding the sections, I can have maximum 3 columns, and in each of the column we can add the web parts. And then again we have this edit section here, this move section, so that I can move this column from here to there, and then even we can delete this section directly from here. So using the modern page is very much easy than using the classic pages. So what we observed with the modern pages is that yes, we have good new web parts to use from, and it looks good on phone, like it is responsive. We can directly start using on phone or tablet, and again it gives very much smooth editing experience. But what is missing from the classic SharePoint site to the modern SharePoint pages mostly is the web parts. So we don't have list view web parts, even we don't have any content search or content query web parts. Neither we have any script editor or content editor web parts available onto the modern pages. And then we just have only one vertical layout, which is kind of a big and clunky web part section. And then we don't have any user custom actions here, and the entire modern page is kind of in a gray shade. So we means at the moment we don't have any option to change this gray shade. So those are the limitations with using the modern pages. So again, as I said, we cannot have a script directly added onto our modern pages. So at least then we don't have these many options available, like saving the site as a template, then maybe a document library, save as a template, then solutions gallery, theme gallery, and so on. So at least all of these options which we were using very much frequently in the classic SharePoint, all those options won't be available for a modern SharePoint site. All right. So then maybe we can quickly move to the list and libraries, and then to the more interesting part, how we can transform the pages. So from the list and library perspective, list and libraries can be easily directly created in the modern SharePoint site. We can just click add an app like the way we used to do on a classic SharePoint. This although take us to the classic SharePoint page, but the experience what we have here is the modern. So for example, if we click custom web part, maybe a webinar, custom list, maybe webinar, and click create. So that list is entirely modern. So sorry. So this list support us to add the columns directly from here, and once the items are added to this list, even we can pin those items, and it can be directly managed from here. Whereas we don't have to go to the list settings for making any changes. Uh, Means if the changes aren't that much complicated. So what is good with the modern list is that it is mobile friendly and responsive. We can pin and filter the items. Then again, it gives us the tile view directly, and even all the edit control blocks and command UI ribbons. Those are the actions available for us to work with the modern list. So what we are missing in the modern list from classic list is that these view styles like calendar, basic table, or document details, which we used to create as an add-on view onto a SharePoint list. Then even we don't have any options for RSS or most popular items. We no more have forms web part or customize in info path option. We cannot add the JS link to modern SharePoint site or modern list. And then there is no option to declare the item as a record or even send to. Although there are copy and move options available, and export to Excel is available for list only, and it is supported only in Edge and IE. So again, no tree view control or metadata navigation for a list or library. Even we cannot add any external data columns or publishing columns. For that, we'll have to again switch back to the classic UI and make it work. And again, one more setback is we don't have paste or import from Excel in a modern list. So at least these are the goods with modern list, but again, these are some limitations with the modern list. So how we can control the modern experience? So for that, we can control it from administration level of central admin, or even from a SharePoint site, or even at the list or library level. So let's see how we can do it. So if I go back to the SharePoint admin center and then to the settings, so from here we can if I just type or search for classic, so at least these are the options from where we can select, like what are the options we should have for each of the site in a SharePoint. Like, do we want to follow the new experience or the classic experience? So this one is for OneDrive, then for list and libraries, and even for a pages. So from here we can turn on or off the modern experience. Again, we have some options available from PNP PowerShell or custom code, by which we can even control this at web level or the site collection level. So most of you might have received this email from Microsoft. So there is a new update from Microsoft that the email says that the SharePoint Online will force the modern experience starting from 1st of April 2019. So what that means is all of the list and libraries, those are in the classic mode right now, they will be automatically shifted to the modern SharePoint. So even though if you are applying all those settings onto a classic SharePoint site, eventually by April we all will move to the modern SharePoint. All right. Then have a look at the modern experience. So for example, let's say we have a classic site created, and now that we want to move to the modern sites, because there are again two scenarios, like we can create the modern site newly, but then again how we can migrate our existing classic SharePoint site to the modern experience. So what is mean by modernization? So modernization mostly involves like we should maximize the use of modern list and library experience. So that means all of the list and library, we should enable the modern experience onto it so that we don't have to make any extra efforts. So in any ways, probably I can show it here. Okay. So, okay, one moment, let me find out the list. Okay, so let's say I have this classic SharePoint site created here, and I have a list here called as a classic list. So this list is entirely a classic list. There is no modern UI to it, but we can move to the list settings of this particular list, and then to the advanced settings, and here we have an option to control how this list should look like. So at least we can set this option if the administrator has already set the newer experience, or simply we can select this new experience so that all of the list in your classic SharePoint site, they will become modern. So now this is a modern list, or this one has changed to the UI of a modern list, from where we can maybe add the columns directly from here, or take advantage of all modern SharePoint list. So, so this is how we can maximize the use of modern list and the library experience. Then the second thing is we should connect our classic SharePoint site to Office 365 group. So we will see like how we can connect our site to Office 365 group, and what are the benefits of it. And then we should transform all our wiki and web part page to the modern pages. Even we will see how we can transform our existing wiki pages and web part pages to the modern pages. And then the last is that we should rebuild our classic publishing portal to a modern portals. So for example, if we are following all these four steps or these four areas, then yes, we are ready for the modern experience. So irrespective of whether right now you are in a classic SharePoint or a modern SharePoint, you will be able to transform your classic intranet to the modern experience. So let's deep dive into each of those areas. So we already have covered like how we can maximize the use of modern list and library. Now we will see how we can connect our site to the Office 365 group. So for connecting our classic SharePoint site to the modern SharePoint site, so this is again a kind of a very crucial step that we should make this happen. And then mostly it is like it brings us one step closer to the modernization. So the transforming the classic SharePoint sites to the modern SharePoint sites involves the ability to connect to the Office 365 group from a classic SharePoint site itself. And then connecting the classic SharePoint site to the Office 365 group brings bring our classic site closer to the modernizations. So the benefits of connecting to the Office 365 group is that when a SharePoint site is connected to the Office 365 group, we get the benefits of group connected services like Microsoft Planner and Microsoft Teams. So the Microsoft Planner is a kind of a simple and visual way to organize the work, and it helps us to create new plans, and then task management, sharing the files, then chat with the team, and get the progress of the work status. And then we can use the Microsoft Teams. So it is kind of a hub for team collaboration in Office 365, and it helps us to collaborate with people, tasks, and files. So the Teams, in short, brings everyone in a shared workspace. So when we connect our classic SharePoint site to Office 365 group, we can get the benefits of Microsoft Planner and Microsoft Teams. So then what happens in the background when we do this? So first is that the new Office 365 group is created and is connected to the SharePoint site. Then the new modern page is created on the SharePoint site and it is set as the home page for that SharePoint site. So by default we get one modern home page for our site. And then the owner specified in the group creation, they become the site collection administrator on SharePoint site. Also, they are added to the owners group on a SharePoint site. And then the members which are specified in the group creation, they becomes the member of the members of the SharePoint site. So once the SharePoint site is connected to the Office 365 group, it works like a modern group created SharePoint site. So the users can be added to the SharePoint site from Office 365 group. So let's see this in practical how this can be done. So I'm again moving back to the classic SharePoint site. So here we can go to this gear icon, and then here we have an option to connect to the Office 365 group. So right now this is a classic SharePoint site. Once I click here, it takes us to a wizard wherein it says that we are now connecting to the Office 365 group and there are some benefits associated with it. So let's click, let's get started. We can give a group name here. So by default, it is the same name as your classic SharePoint site, but even it can be changed if required. And by default, it creates one group alias. And fortunately, now it is saying that the group alias is available, so we can start using this group. Then again, we can decide whether this group should be a private or a public. And once it is done, we can click the connect group. So, all right. So we don't need to specify any additional owners. So all these owners, they will become the site collection administrators, and all the members, they will become members of the site. So I will click finish. So now you can see that this has automatically changed the home page for our site, and now it is home1.aspx, but this is the entire modern experience what we have. So we have a benefit here that we are connected to the Office 365 group, from which we can take advantage of Microsoft Planner, Microsoft Teams, even sharing the files with the users. And then we have this new modern page applied as the home page for our SharePoint site. So, so this is the first step that we should follow in order to get our classic SharePoint site transformed to the modern site. So, all right, so we already had this demo. Then how we can enable this modern experience onto the root site collection? Probably we will not go into a demo of it, but we will just go through a theory and probably you can try it on your own. So there is one commandlet which is made available in the September 2018 Ignite session, and it is called as enable communication site, enable-com site. So what it does is it just transform your root site collections to the communication site. So again, please note that this command may or may not be available onto your tenant, but this should be available to your tenant soon. So even this command is not yet available on my tenant so that I can demo it. But what happens mostly is that our root site is by default a classic team site, and we start building our modern intranet onto the modern SharePoint sites. So it becomes like the root site is a classic site, whereas the all other sites, they are modern sites. So we also want to transform that classic SharePoint site to a modern SharePoint site so that we can have that modern look and feel throughout. So for that, we can use this enable-com site command, which will just modernize your root site collection to look like as a modern communication site. But it is not yet publicly available. It may or may not be available onto your tenant. But don't worry, if you don't have this available onto your tenant, the next thing is that there is one hack. So when you are creating or recreating the root site, maybe you can add this option like the site page publishing hash zero, which is the site template for a modern community site. So you can open your developer window by clicking F12, and you can just hook up this option there and select it for creating your SharePoint site. And yes, you will have the modern SharePoint site as your root site. So I already have done it. Probably I can show it to you because this takes some time. That's the reason I thought to not include it in the demo. But here you can observe that this is my root site and this is the modern communication site. So if you want to get it done, probably you can use this hack if this enable-com site is not available for your tenant. All right. So then we will go to SharePoint modernization scanner. So what is mean by SharePoint modernization scanner and why it came into the picture? So the transformation of classic to modern SharePoint is kind of a phase journey. The first phase is to analyze your classic SharePoint site's readiness for modern SharePoint. So when we think of transforming classic sites to the modern, our tenant might have hundreds or even thousands of sites. So it is a tough choice for us to decide which site will be a good candidate to start with. So the first thought which comes to mind is that maybe prepare a list of components in our site, maybe custom web parts we have, or JavaScript codes, custom actions, etc. And then select the site which has lesser customizations. So it might be a good idea, but when we are preparing this inventory by going through thousands of those sites, it is never an easy task. So Microsoft has already provided us a tool called as SharePoint Modernization Scanner, which is publicly available and which help us to understand the readiness of our classic SharePoint site to the modernizations. So then why this SharePoint modernization scanner is because this is a tool from Microsoft, which is a free tool, and it helps us to carry out the detailed analysis like the readiness of our classic SharePoint site to connect to Office 365 group. That means whether our classic SharePoint site is able to connect to Office 365 group, or even check the compatibility of list or libraries for a modern experience, and readiness of wiki and web part pages for the page modernizations. So the outcome of this tool can be used to drive the planning, remediation, and the migration while transforming our classic SharePoint sites to modern. So this tool will provide us more of a factual data in a dashboard manner. So probably we will have a look at this tool itself. So this tool can be easily downloaded from this GitHub. So I already have downloaded it. So this is the tool, how it looks like. This is just an exe. So I will double click this exe so that we can run it. Oh, okay. So here we have multiple options to connect to our SharePoint tenant. So these are some options which are preferred one, but this requires some additional configuration to be done at the Microsoft Azure side. So probably for keeping it simple, I will just select user and username and password. So let me just type my username password here. So this is my custom domain, custom public domain. Okay, and I will just click next. So then again here we have a few more options, like do we want to perform this analysis onto an entire tenant, or maybe a selected site collections, or if we already have listed out all these sites in a CSV format, we can use that CSV. So probably I will go with selected site collections because I don't want to take a time for scanning my entire tenant. So probably I can select this site itself, which is a classic site. I will add it here, and then I can just click next. And here we have again option like what do we want to exactly scan. So the scan mode. So do we want to just scan for group readiness or list readiness or web pages readiness, or maybe entire. So let's have the full scan done. So I will click next, and it will take maybe some time to connect to the site and run the scan. So once the scan is done, we should see one folder created here that will have all the data about scanning. So we might have to wait for 1 minute or so. Okay. So depending on how many subsites you have, or depending on how much complexity or custom web parts do you have on your site, this will take some time. But hopefully I don't have that much of customizations onto my site, so this shouldn't take that much time, and the report should come very fast. So we already see that one folder has been created here. Okay, so the running has done. Okay, so I will open up this folder. So as we see this folder, this has got bunch of CSVs here, and then bunch of Excels here, XLSX. So what the CSV are, these are the raw data. Probably I can just open one. So this one has got the scan result of modernization list. So that means this has all the data about my SharePoint list. So this is the title and all those things, and this will denote whether this particular list is compatible to be transformed to a modern SharePoint. So probably let's not go into the raw data. So this is the raw data for pages, then for site, then for web and web parts and all those things. So the what is more important to us is this Office 365 group connection readiness, list readiness, pages readiness, and the entire portal transformation readiness. So probably I will just open this Office 365 group connection readiness. So this report will give us the idea whether our classic SharePoint site is capable enough to get connected to Office 365 group. So by default, this is just the raw data. But once we click enable content, it will run the macros behind, and then it will give us the actual data. So right now it is just pointing or giving the mock data of Contoso, and this should reflect back to my tenant. So maybe we will have to wait for a few moments. Okay, it is still working. Okay, so now that we can see that this is now reflecting to my side. So the report is like, yeah, true. So we are, Miss My Site is ready for getting connected to the Office 65 group. Here is one warning. So the warning, this one is saying that publishing portals do not support modern pages, and this site has already existing Office 365 group connected. So since I already have connected this site to the Office 365 tenant, so this is giving us that warning. And again, here are some other options like how many site URLs we have. And for example, if we have multiple sites, then in that case, this will give us stacked bar of whether each of the site is able to connect to Office 365 group or not. Then again, we have some overviews here, and below that again we have some kind of information which we can read through, and if there are any warnings, we can make use of these messages to resolve the warnings. And once we have resolved the warning, we will be able to run the report again and get our classic site connected to Office 365 group. Again, maybe one thing is that if I just right click here and click unhide, so maybe blockers, again unhide warnings. So you can see that this is referring back to the CSV format. So all of the data which was in the CSV, it has consolidated all that information, and it has created this dashboard. So for example, if you have thousands of SharePoint sites in your tenant, no issues. You can directly connect all those sites here, and then you will get this entire report whether your site is ready for Office 365 modernization or not. Probably we will close this report. Let's go for list readiness. And the other reports are kind of same only, so probably we will not go through all the reports, but I will encourage you to run this report on your classic SharePoint sites so that you will get idea of whether your classic SharePoint site, based on whatever customizations you have done so far to it, is able to connect to the Office 365 group, or whether it is supported for modernization. So again, this is the report for my site, and here are some warnings which I might have to resolve in order to get all the list ready for Office 365. So if we see the red for any of your report, in that case there is something severe. If there are oranges, then you don't have to might do anything, because we usually have warnings in our code, so we can safely ignore. So yeah, so if you have JS link on your list, then this will be reported here. So fortunately I don't have any JS link here, so this is giving me a go green signal so that I can directly have this list ready for modern SharePoint. Then again, if it is blocked by field level JS link or any XSL link, all those options will be reported here, and then from here we can take a decision whether to remove that JS link, or how we can transform that JS link to a modern SharePoint. We will cover that in a while. So this will give you entire report of your site readiness for a modernization. All right. So I will not open the other two reports. They are more of like a same thing, like page transformation and publishing portal transformation. I will encourage you to run all these reports onto your SharePoint sites. So this is the freely available tool from Microsoft. You can download it and run it against your tenant or against your classic SharePoint sites which you want to modernize. So the okay, so demo we already had. Then we will see like how we can transform an existing classic SharePoint site to the to the modern site. All right. So then that will involve modernizing the pages, and how we can modernize all those pages. So at least we have been using this classic SharePoint for many years, and the classic SharePoint offers nice wiki and web part pages to represent our information. So Microsoft is rolling new updates to the SharePoint Online on a frequent basis. So at this time, we are living into kind of two worlds of SharePoint, like the classic SharePoint and the modern SharePoint. And we are developing newer sites with modern SharePoint and maintaining also our classic old SharePoint sites. So it's not an easy task for us to convert all of our classic SharePoint sites to modern sites, but it needs to undergo a massive thought process. But the good news for us is that Office Developer Patterns and Practices (PNP), they have come up with an approach to help us migrate our classic SharePoint pages to the modern look and feel. So the classic pages are like which are offered by SharePoint or the classic SharePoint, and they had predefined placeholders to add the content to the SharePoint. So in a few situations we had to adjust with a close matching layout of the page, whereas the modern pages are on the other hand, they offer very dynamic layout, and we can add as many sections as we want and align those as per our content. So so far we have developed huge number of classic SharePoint sites, and we have created huge classic pages onto their SharePoint sites. So can we get all those pages and sites modern easily? So yeah, the answer is yes. We can perform an in-place upgrade using Office Dev PNP solution, which will help us modernizing the classic pages to the to the modern pages. So the modernization of pages is mostly done like transforming your classic wiki or web part page to the modern client side page. And the page structure, for example, I have a classic wiki page created with header and two columns. So it will be kept as it is, and the wiki HTML will be transformed into the HTML that works on a modern page. And all the web parts on the pages, they are replaced with the modern first party web parts. So first party, that means only the web parts which are allowed and available on modern SharePoint site. And the modern page generates a preview, and also it keeps our old page as it is, so that we can compare both the pages, and if we don't like the modern page, we can again switch back to the classic UI. So here is one example, and we will see in the practice how we can transform our classic pages to the modern pages. So firstly, that as I said, there is a solution from PNP. So once you have SharePoint Online management shell with you, you can run this command so that it will install this particular module available from PNP, so that we can start transforming our pages. So probably I will demo it right away. I will open the online management shell as an administrator. I already have installed this module to save the time, but usually it doesn't take much time to install the module. And then the next step is that we'll have to connect to our site on which we have some pages, maybe classic pages, and then we can use this particular command to modernize the pages. So okay, so let's see this in practice, how we can do it. So okay, all right, maybe yeah, here. So I will close the tabs which we are not using. Okay. Okay, so I already have created one site here called as SPO Classic, wherein we just have transformed this site to the Office 365 group, so that we have this modern home page here. I will go to the site contents just to show that I already have few pages created here. So for this demo purpose, if I go to site pages, I have created two pages here. First one is test web part page, and then the test wiki page. So probably I will open both. Okay. So this one is classic wiki page. Maybe I can edit so that you will get the clear picture. So this particular wiki page has got a header here, then two columns here, then a footer here. So this is a normal wiki page. I will not save it. So, and I have added a few web parts here. First one is the content editor web parts, then one image, one video here, some text here, and then then a list web part here. Then again I have one web part page here. So this web part page is pretty simple. In the header section, I just have added one list view web part, and then here I just have added one image to the left column of this particular web part page. So I will even stop editing for here. So we have one wiki page, one web part page with us, and now that we are going to transform this to a modern SharePoint page. So I will refresh this one more time so that we can just see we have only two things here. All right. So we are now going to connect to that SharePoint online site, which is this one. So I will type a command here, connect hyphen, sorry, PNP online. And then the URL to this will be this classic site. Okay. So this will ask me for username and password. So I will type it. Okay, so this should help us to connect to our site. Okay, so we are now connected to the site. So we will try to convert this wiki page and web part page to a modern page. So for that I will type a command, convert to hyphen PNP client side page. We can use tab to directly get to the command. And then identity, I will type it as name of the page. So the name of the page here is test webpart.aspx. So I will just type test -wp.aspx and just hit enter. So what this will do is this will basically try to convert that old or classic web part page to the modern page. So while doing this modernization, what it will do is it will transform the HTML of that particular web part page to a modern page, and then it will try to replicate all the web parts which are existing onto the classic SharePoint site to a modern SharePoint sites. So okay, this has done. Even you can see that we now have one web part page here called as migrated test web part ASPX. So let's open it. So here you can see that we already have our content here. So this was the old SharePoint web part page which had classic SharePoint list and an image viewer, and this has been now converted to the classic list and the image viewer here. So we don't have to make any extra efforts. We can directly use this command and get all our classic SharePoint pages like this converted to the modern pages. All right, so that was very simple, pretty simple. So let's see how it works with wiki page. So the same thing we will do. Instead of test WP, I will just type test wiki.aspx, and while this is running, we will again switch back here so that we can see the page is being created. So this might take some time because that particular wiki page had some more content and some more web parts. So okay, so this is done. We will open up this modern page. So you can see again this was able to transform our old classic wiki page to the modern page. So we will compare it side by side. So here you can see we had this container web part, but as we see here, we don't have any container web parts. So the reason is, like as we discussed, containers, script editors, these web parts are not at all supported in modern SharePoint. So this modernization will leave out all those web parts on classic itself. It will not get promoted to the modern SharePoint sites because this modern SharePoint site modernization, it will only support the first party web parts. So what I mean by first party web part is, if I edit this page, try to add a web part here, somewhere here maybe. So all the web parts which are available here, these are called as the first party web part. So here we have a normal text and format web part, but we don't have any content editor or a script editor web part. So for that reason, maybe I will discard the change. So for that reason, this particular container web part hasn't got transformed to the modern page. But you can see all the other supported web parts like images, videos, text here, and the list view web parts here, they got transformed to the modern page. So this is how we can use these simple commands from PNP and get transformed all our SharePoint pages which are probably created as a wiki page or a web part page to a modern page. So this is how we can transform entire our classic SharePoint site to the modern SharePoint site. So maybe let's wrap up this. Okay, so before that, for example, let's say you have some customizations applied onto your old classic SharePoint site, then how you can transform those to the modern SharePoint site. So let's say onto the list and libraries, you have JS link already applied on a classic SharePoint site. Then the alternative in modern SharePoint site is that probably you can use the column formatting, and if the out-of-box column formatting doesn't fit your requirements, in that case you can use the SharePoint framework field customizer extension. You can extend that column and make the changes what you need. Then for example, on the pages, if you have any classic web parts created, for example maybe using JSON or any other logic, then at least in modern SharePoint it only supports the first party client side web parts, as we saw that it did not transform the container web part. But you can use all those first party web parts, and for any of your customizations probably you can use SharePoint framework web parts. You can develop your own SPFX web part and add it onto the modern page. From the site perspective, for example, if you have any custom actions or embedded JavaScript, then it won't be migrated to the modern SharePoint. But again, there you will have to create SPFX application customizer extensions to make it work. So at least this tool will help you to get all your first party components migrated to modern SharePoint. But rest of the other customizations you will have to do using probably SPFX or some other other things. Again, for example, if you already have done any customizations using Microsoft Azure or anything like that, so yes, they will definitely be supported in modern SharePoint. So for example, if you have created any Azure functions or Azure web jobs which you used in classic SharePoint, so yes, they will be continued to support as it is in a modern SharePoint. Then okay, we already saw this demo. Then yeah, so this was the last demo from my presentation, like how we can build the entire classic portal to modern SharePoint portal. So for that, I already had created one site. This was my classic team site, which has got this news feed, then few documents here, then some text content here, then some Excel chart web parts here, and then the calendars here. So this is how it was looking into an old SharePoint site. So let's see how this one looks when we transform this entirely to a modern SharePoint site. So the news feed, we can directly transform it to a news, which is a new functionality in modern SharePoint. We can from here add new post or new news or links. So this is how we have transformed this news feed into a news. And then the documents, which was kind of an out-of-box web part or out-of-box functionality of classic SharePoint, it will be supported as it is in a modern SharePoint. Again, we had maybe a container web part here, which was supporting this text, which is like maybe a rich text or hyperlinks or all those things. So here we can probably use the text web part, which is a first party modern SharePoint web part, to make it work. Then probably coming to the calendar, in the old SharePoint site, we created a calendar list, and inside that we can add the calendars, but those were kind of an static calendar. They doesn't popped up as an invite onto our Outlook. Whereas once we are connected our site to the Office 365 group, in that case, we can use this group calendar concept here, so that we can add the event onto the Office 365 calendar, and that will get reflected here. So we don't have to build any separate calendar list here, but we can directly make a use of Office 365 calendar itself. So this is the beauty of having modern SharePoint here. Then the next thing was, for example, if you want to create any charting in an Excel. So first thing that we will have to create some kind of Excel. So here we have one example, like who ate how many apples in this particular month, and from in the Excel we had to create some pivots and even create some charts, and then we used to use those as the named records here, so that we can run those onto a SharePoint environment. Whereas we don't have to do this here. So instead of Excel, I have used a simple list here, and that list has all this data. Probably I can show you here. I will maybe duplicate this, go to the site contents, and here we are pulling all that information from a list, and we are not creating or adding any extra Excel here. And we are using the chart web part, which is out of the box here, and it again syncs the data with the SharePoint list, so we can directly use that web part. Probably I can edit this page and show you how that has been done. So this is simple news web part, this is the text web part, and then we have documents out of the box, and this one is chart web part, which help us to connect to the SharePoint list, get the data from there, and render that data instead of creating complex um, Excels and creating the charts there. It can be directly done in a SharePoint. And this one is a group calendar web part, which is directly connected to Office 365 group. We are no more creating offline calendar list and adding the events there. So this is the modern SharePoint list. Oh, sorry, modern SharePoint calendar. So this is how we can transform our entire classic SharePoint site to a modern SharePoint site. All right. So then, for example, if you are still missing any kind of functionalities, then in any case you can go to this sharepoint.uservoice.com. You can raise your voice based on what suggestions you have or what improvements you want from the SharePoint product. And if you are getting some good votes, in that case, your idea will be implemented. And here are some resources which will help you to transform your journey from classic SharePoint site to modern SharePoint sites. So irrespective of whether you are directly creating modern SharePoint sites or if you have already created classic SharePoint sites and you want to transform all those into a modern SharePoint sites. So I guess with that I'm done with my part. Maybe I will hand it over to Prasham for the next part, and then probably we can have the Q&As. So all right, let me go back here and let me promote Prasham for the presenter.